Commander Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her desk, watching the alien transmission for the 7th time. The blue-skinned Zephyrian speaker stood at what appeared to be a podium made of crystalline material, addressing cameras with 4 of its 6 eyes, while the other 2 scanned notes held in its lower pair of hands. Citizens of the Galactic Coalition. The alien began in perfect standard galactic, its voice carrying that distinctive harmonic quality that made all Zephyrian speech sound like a choir. We bring news of a great victory for peace and order throughout our shared galaxy. Sarah's jaw tightened as she reached the part that had made her summon her entire command staff. The Zephyrian's upper eyes fixed directly on the camera with an expression that could only be described as satisfied smugness. The human threat has been permanently neutralized. After careful deliberation and surgical military action, we can confirm that the species known as Homo sapiens has been completely eliminated from their homeworld of Earth and all their colonial outposts. The aggressive, expansionist behavior that has plagued our sector for the past 50 Earth years has finally come to an end. The transmission continued with detailed descriptions of burning human cities, orbital bombardments, and the systematic destruction of Earth's infrastructure. The Zephyrian described how human survivors had allegedly begged for mercy in their final moments, how children had cried out for parents who could not save them, how the proud human military had crumbled like paper before superior Zephyrian technology. None of it had happened. Not a single word. Sarah paused the transmission and looked around the conference room at the faces of her senior staff. Admiral Marcus Webb sat at the far end of the table, his weathered features showing a mixture of rage and calculation. Colonel Zhang Wei, head of intelligence, drummed his fingers against the titanium surface with barely contained fury. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the civilian representative from the Science Council, looked pale but determined. "Well," Sarah said quietly, "I think we can all agree that reports of our extinction have been greatly exaggerated." Admiral Webb leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "How long has this been broadcasting?" Colonel Zhang consulted his tablet. "Intercepted the transmission 18 hours ago. Based on the relay signatures, it's been propagating through the Galactic Communication Network for approximately 17 2 hours. By now, every major civilization in our local cluster has received it." "And their reactions?" Dr. Vasquez asked. Zhang replied, calling up additional data. "The Altarian Republic issued a statement expressing solemn regret at the loss of a developing species. The Centauri Federation called it a tragic but necessary action to preserve galactic stability. The Andromedans," he paused, "the Andromedans are apparently planning a celebration." Sarah stood and began pacing behind her chair, her mind racing through the implications. "So as far as the galaxy is concerned, humanity is completely extinct. Every potential ally thinks we're dead. Every enemy believes the threat is over. The question is," Admiral Webb said slowly, "why did the Zephyrians do this? They have to know we'd intercept the transmission eventually. They have to know we'd find out." Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat. "I might have an answer to that." She activated her own holographic display, showing diplomatic communications from the past several months. "We've been tracking increasing pressure on the Zephyrians from other coalition members about the human problem. Several species have been pushing for more aggressive action against our expansion into what they consider their sphere of influence. The display showed meeting transcripts, intercepted communications, and diplomatic cables that painted a clear picture of growing anti-human sentiment among the galaxy's established powers. "The humans reproduce too fast," Zhang read from one transcript. "They adapt too quickly. They ask too many questions about technologies they're not ready for. They refuse to accept their place in the natural galactic hierarchy. So the Zephyrians decided to claim they'd already solved the problem," Sarah concluded. "They get credit for eliminating the human threat without actually having to fight a war they might not win." Admiral Webb's expression had shifted from rage to something far more dangerous. "They've essentially painted a target on themselves. If the galaxy believes we're extinct, then anything that happens to the Zephyrians can't possibly be blamed on us." Colonel Zhang caught on immediately. "We're ghosts. We can strike anywhere, at any time, and no one will even consider that it might be human retaliation because humans don't exist anymore." Dr. Vasquez looked uncomfortable. "Are we seriously discussing using this deception for military action? The ethical implications alone," Elena, Sarah interrupted gently. "They just told the entire galaxy that they exterminated our species." "That they murdered 8 billion humans, including children. They described our suffering in detail for entertainment value. What ethical considerations do you think we owe them?" The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled on everyone present. They were dealing with a species that had just claimed credit for genocide on a galactic scale, purely for political advantage. Admiral Webb broke the silence. We need to consider our options carefully. This is an unprecedented situation. Sarah nodded and activated the room's main display, showing a tactical map of human space and the surrounding sectors. Let's start with what we know. Earth and all our colonies are completely intact and operational. Our military forces are at normal readiness levels. Our industrial capacity is functioning normally. Meanwhile, every potential enemy in the galaxy thinks we no longer exist. She highlighted several Zephyrian outposts and trade routes. The Zephyrians have been expanding aggressively into sectors they claimed were freed up by our alleged extinction. They're already moving civilian populations into systems we were considering for colonization. Colonel Zhang added tactical overlays to the display. Their military posture has shifted dramatically since the broadcast. Fleet deployments that were previously focused on containing human expansion have been reassigned to other sectors. Their border defenses facing our space have been reduced by nearly 60%. They're acting like we really are dead, Dr. Vasquez observed. Which gives us the ultimate strategic advantage, Admiral Webb said. An enemy that doesn't believe you exist can't prepare for your attack. Sarah studied the map, her mind working through possibilities. The more she thought about it, the more the audacity of the Zephyrian deception became clear. They hadn't just lied to the galaxy about committing genocide, they were actively profiting from that lie. There's something else, Colonel Zhang said, highlighting additional intelligence data. Since the broadcast, Zephyrian trading guilds have been advertising exotic artifacts from the extinct human civilization. They're selling supposed human technology and cultural items to collector markets throughout the coalition. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. They're selling fake human memorabilia, Doctor. Vasquez said slowly. They're literally profiting from our supposed extinction. Admiral Webb's knuckles had gone white where he gripped the edge of the table. They turned our alleged genocide into a business opportunity. Sarah felt something cold and calculating settle in her chest. The Zephyrians hadn't just lied about destroying humanity, they were treating it like a commercial venture. They were selling the idea of human death to the highest bidder while expanding into human territory and claiming credit for eliminating what other species saw as a threat. I think, Sarah said quietly, it's time we gave the galaxy what it expects from an extinct species. She turned to face her staff, her expression hardening with resolve. If the Zephyrians want to take credit for destroying humanity, then let them. But they should be very careful what they wish for. Admiral Webb leaned back in his chair, understanding immediately. An extinct species can't be held accountable for its actions. Dead civilizations don't need to follow galactic law or honor treaties. Ghosts don't negotiate, Colonel Zhang added. They haunt. Dr. Vasquez still looked troubled, but there was a new steel in her voice. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. We can't let innocent people suffer for Zephyrian lies. Sarah nodded.
Agreed. This isn't about causing random destruction.
This is about making the Zephyrians face the consequences of claiming to have committed genocide. She activated a secure communication channel to Earth Command. Priority Alpha transmission to all colonial governors and fleet commanders. Authorization Chen 77 Alpha. The connection established immediately, linking her to the highest levels of human military and civilian leadership across dozens of star systems. This is Commander Chen of Deep Space Station Aurora. As of this moment, humanity is officially extinct according to galactic records. The Zephyrian Collective has claimed credit for our complete destruction and is profiting from that claim. All human operations are now classified as non-existent. She paused, letting the implications sink in across the communication network. What does it mean to be a species that doesn't exist? It means we have no obligations to anyone or anything except ourselves. It means that anything we do to the Zephyrians is impossible by definition because extinct species can't take action. The responses began coming in immediately. Fleet Admiral Harrison from the Mars Defense Command was the first to speak. Commander, are you suggesting we use our supposed extinction as cover for military operations? I'm suggesting, Sarah replied, that if the Zephyrians want to take credit for destroying humanity, they should experience what that actually means. They've told the galaxy that they broke us completely, that they reduced us to begging and desperation. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. I think it's time we showed them what humans actually become when they have nothing left to lose. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian broadcast, Captain Lisa Rodriguez guided her stealth frigate through the asteroid field surrounding the Kepler 442 system. The ship moved like a whisper through space, its experimental cloaking technology rendering it invisible to all known detection methods. According to galactic records, the vessel didn't exist. According to those same records, neither did its crew. Target acquisition confirmed, Lieutenant Commander Park announced from the sensor station. Zephyrian mining operation Grid 77. Population approximately 800 civilians, 60 military personnel. Rodriguez studied the holographic display showing the Zephyrian mining facility. It was exactly what human intelligence had predicted. A hastily constructed operation designed to strip valuable rare earth elements from asteroids in what the Zephyrians now considered liberated territory following humanity's supposed extinction. Any human claims to this system? She asked. Negative, Park replied. Human surveys identified it as economically viable, but we hadn't established any formal claims before the broadcast. So they're not technically stealing from us? Rodriguez mused. They're just expanding into space they feel safe claiming because the previous competition is allegedly dead. She activated the ship's communication array, but instead of sending a transmission to the mining facility, she opened a channel to every human vessel within a 50 light-year radius. The coordination for what they'd started calling the Ghost Protocol required precise timing across multiple systems. All units, this is Ghost Leader, she said, using the new call signs that had been implemented fleet-wide. Confirm status for Operation Haunting. Responses came in from across human space. Ghost 2 through Ghost 15 confirmed ready status from positions throughout former human exploration sectors. Each ship was positioned near a Zephyrian facility that had been established since the Extinction broadcast. Remember, Rodriguez continued, this isn't about destruction. This is about sending a message. The Zephyrians told the galaxy they killed us all. Today they get to experience what it feels like when the dead refuse to stay buried. She cut the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. Commander Singh, target their communication arrays and power systems only. I want them stranded and unable to call for help, but I don't want casualties. Understood, Captain. Weapons locked on non-essential systems. Rodriguez took a deep breath. What they were about to do would change everything. Until now, human military operations had been conducted according to galactic law and diplomatic protocols. They'd followed rules of engagement, respected sovereignty, and tried to be good galactic citizens despite the prejudice they faced from older civilizations. But extinct species don't follow galactic law. Dead civilizations have no diplomatic obligations. Fire. The stealth frigate's weapon systems engaged silently, sending precisely targeted energy pulses toward the Zephyrian facility. The mining station's communication dishes exploded in showers of sparks. Power coupling stations detonated in sequence. Emergency lights flickered on as the facility switched to backup power. Then Rodriguez did something that violated every principle of human military doctrine she'd been taught. She decloaked her ship directly above the mining facility. The reaction was immediate. Emergency alarms began wailing across the Zephyrian station as sensors registered the impossible, a human warship appearing out of nowhere in a system where humans were supposed to be extinct. This is Mining Supervisor Kethval of the Zephyrian Collective, came the panic transmission. Unknown vessel, identify yourself immediately. Rodriguez smiled and opened a communication channel. When her face appeared on the facility's main screens, she could practically feel the shock and terror rippling through the 800 Zephyrians below. Greetings, Supervisor, she said pleasantly. I am Captain Lisa Rodriguez of the human starship Poltergeist. According to your government's recent broadcast, I don't exist. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, Kethel finally stammered. Humans are extinct. The collective confirmed complete elimination of your species. Did they? Rodriguez asked, tilting her head with mock curiosity. How fascinating. Tell me, Supervisor, what does it feel like to see a ghost? Throughout the mining facility, Zephyrian workers had stopped what they were doing to stare at the screens showing the impossible human captain. Many of them had celebrated when the Extinction broadcast was announced. Some had even purchased authentic human artifacts from Zephyrian merchants. What do you want? Kethval asked, his voice shaking. I want to deliver a message, Rodriguez replied. Your government told the galaxy that they exterminated my species. They described in vivid detail how human children died crying for their parents. They claimed credit for genocide and then used that claim to expand into our territory and profit from our supposed suffering. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. What your government failed to consider is what happens when an extinct species decides to return the favor. The transmission cut out as Rodriguez turned to her crew. Begin Phase 2. Throughout the facility, the lights began flickering in a specific pattern. The Zephyrians didn't immediately recognize it, but human intelligence knew they would figure it out quickly enough. It was Morse code spelling out the same message over and over. WE remember. WE return. W repay. All systems showing green, Singh reported. No casualties, facility intact, but completely disabled. Excellent. Rodriguez reactivated the communication channel. Supervisor Kathval, your facility will remain operational, but your communication and navigation systems have been permanently disabled. You'll need to send a distress signal using emergency beacons, which should reach Zephyr in space in approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Kathval's voice cracked. We don't have 6 weeks of supplies. Then I suggest you ration carefully, Rodriguez replied with false sympathy. Your government had no problem describing how human children starved during their fictional siege of Earth. Perhaps this will give you some perspective on their storytelling choices. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Don't worry, though. Unlike the fictional genocide your government described, we're not actually going to let you die. Human supply ships will arrive in 5 weeks with everything you need to survive. Consider it a demonstration of the difference between human military doctrine and Zephyrian propaganda. The confusion in Kathval's voice was evident. You're going to help us? We're going to keep you alive, Rodriguez corrected. But first, you're going to experience exactly what your government claimed they did to us. Complete isolation, uncertainty about survival, and the knowledge that a superior military force has you completely at their mercy. She smiled again, and this time it was genuinely pleasant. The difference is, when this is over, you'll still be alive to tell people what actually happened here. Your government robbed us of that courtesy in their fictional account of our extinction. Similar scenes were playing out across 15 star systems as human ghost ships appeared at Zephyrian facilities that had been established since the Extinction broadcast. Each crew followed the same protocol. Disable communications and non-essential systems, reveal themselves as impossible human survivors, deliver the same message about returning the favor, and then provide just enough uncertainty to make the Zephyrians experience genuine fear without causing actual harm. Rodriguez cloaked her ship again and opened the fleet communication channel. Ghost leader to all units. Report status. One by one the confirmations came in. 15 facilities disabled. 0 casualties. Hundreds of Zephyrians now sitting in disabled outposts trying to process the impossible reality that the species their government claimed to have exterminated was very much alive and clearly unimpressed with being declared dead. Phase 2 complete, Rodriguez announced. All units proceed to Phase 3 coordinates. As the human ships moved toward their next targets, emergency beacons began activating throughout Zephyrian space. Panicked messages from mining supervisors, colonial administrators, and military outpost commanders, all reporting the same impossible thing. But that was impossible. Humans were extinct. The collective had confirmed it. In the Zephyrian capital system, Grand Admiral Zethkri received the first reports with disbelief, then anger, then a growing sense of dread. 17 facilities had reported human attacks in the past 6 hours. All described the same pattern: stealth ships appearing out of nowhere, human captains identifying themselves before disabling communications and then vanishing again. This has to be some kind of hoax, he told his intelligence chief. Humans are extinct. We confirmed complete elimination of their species. Sir, his aide replied carefully, what if we didn't actually eliminate them? What if the elimination reports were premature? The silence in the Admiral's office stretched for several long minutes. You're suggesting that we announced the extinction of a species that was still very much alive? Zethkri asked slowly. Sir, I'm suggesting that if humans really were extinct, we wouldn't be receiving 17 separate reports of human military actions. Admiral Zethkri felt something cold settle in his stomach. If humans were still alive, if they'd intercepted the Extinction broadcast, if they'd discovered that the Zephyrian Collective had claimed credit for genocide that never happened... Get me the Defense Council, he ordered. Emergency session. Maximum security. As his aide hurried to comply, Zethkri stared at the tactical display showing the locations of the reported human attacks. They formed a perfect pattern around Zephyrian expansion into formerly contested space. Every single facility hit had been established since the Extinction broadcast. It wasn't random violence. It was a methodical response to Zephyrian expansion into territory they'd claimed was liberated by human extinction. Sir, his aide called, the Defense Council is assembled. Zethkri took a deep breath and activated the secure communication channel. When the faces of the collective's senior military leadership appeared on his screen, he could see his own growing panic reflected in their expressions. Gentlemen, he began, I believe we may have made a significant error in our recent extinction announcement. Grand Counselor Veltar was the first to speak. Are you suggesting the humans somehow survived our elimination campaign? I'm suggesting, Zethkari replied carefully. That there may not have been an elimination campaign to survive. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral, Counselor Veltar said slowly, are you telling this council that we announced the extinction of a species we never actually fought? Before Zethkari could answer, his communications officer burst into the room. Sir, priority transmission from the frontier. You need to see this immediately. The young officer activated the main display, showing a message that had just been transmitted on all Zephyrian military frequencies. The speaker was a human woman in military uniform, sitting calmly in what appeared to be the command center of a warship. This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Human Defense Force, the woman's voice said clearly. We've been watching the galaxy's reaction to our supposed extinction with great interest. Today, we decided to introduce ourselves to some of your newer facilities in our former exploration sectors. Admiral Webb's expression was perfectly calm, almost conversational. We want to assure the Zephyrian Collective that reports of humanity's extinction have been greatly exaggerated. We also want to thank you for the tactical advantage you've given us by announcing our death to the galaxy. It's amazing how much easier military operations become when your enemy doesn't believe you exist. She leaned forward slightly. We'll be in touch again very soon. After all, you've told the galaxy that you eliminated our entire species. We feel obligated to show you what that actually looks like. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian Defense Council staring at a blank screen in horrified silence. Grand Admiral Zethkari felt his career, his government, and possibly his entire species' future crumbling around him. They'd just discovered that claiming credit for genocide against a very much alive and increasingly hostile species was a remarkably poor strategic decision. Ambassador Kira Nakamura materialized in the Zephyrian diplomatic facility on Proxima Station exactly 67 days after the first ghost ship attacks. She wore the formal black uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps, a service that according to galactic records no longer existed. The Zephyrian security detail that met her seemed unsure whether to arrest her, bow to her, or run away screaming. Ambassador Veltara will see you now, the lead security officer managed, his voice barely steady. Kira followed them through corridors lined with viewing ports showing the swirling gases of the Proxima Nebula. Proxima Station had been built as a neutral diplomatic facility where species could meet on equal ground. Today, it would host a conversation between the living and the supposedly dead. The conference room was a marvel of diplomatic architecture, with environmental controls adjusted to accommodate multiple species simultaneously. Ambassador Valterra waited at the far end of a crystalline table, her blue skin pale with stress and her 6 eyes showing the strain of the past 2 months. 2 months during which human ghost ships had systematically appeared at over 200 Zephyrian facilities across 40 star systems. Ambassador Nakamura. Valvathara began carefully. I want to first express the collective's relief that humanity was not actually extinct. Kira took her seat across from the Zephyrian diplomat and activated a small recording device. How thoughtful. I'm sure the families of the 8 billion humans your government claimed to have murdered will be touched by your concern. There was a miscommunication. A miscommunication. Kira's voice remained perfectly level. Your government broadcast detailed descriptions of human children dying in the streets. They described how human military forces allegedly begged for mercy before being slaughtered. They sold supposed artifacts from our extinct civilization to collector markets throughout the galaxy. She leaned back in her chair, studying the increasingly uncomfortable Zephyrian. Tell me, Ambassador, how exactly does one miscommunicate genocide? Velthara's lower pair of hands fidgeted with her notes while her upper eyes avoided direct contact. The collective acknowledges that the announcement was premature. There were political pressures from other coalition members regarding human expansion, and the decision was made to claim resolution of the situation before actual resolution was achieved. So you lied about committing genocide to score political points with your allies, Kira summarized, and then you used that lie to justify expanding into space you thought we could no longer contest. The situation is more complex than that, is it? Kira activated her holographic display showing tactical data from the past 2 months. Since your extinction broadcast, Zephyrian military and civilian assets have moved into 47 star systems that were under human exploration claims. You've established mining operations, colonial outposts, and military bases. You've distributed maps showing these systems as part of your sovereign territory. The display showed the expansion in vivid detail, along with communications intercepts proving that Zephyrian leadership had explicitly ordered the expansion to take advantage of humanity's supposed elimination. You didn't just lie about killing us, Kira continued. You use that lie as justification for the largest territorial expansion in Zephyrian history. Belthara's skin had taken on a distinctly greenish tint. Ambassador, the collective is prepared to discuss compensation for any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? For the first time, genuine emotion crept into Kira's voice. Your government announced to the galaxy that they had committed genocide. They described our suffering in detail. They took credit for exterminating entire species and used that claim to expand their territory and increase their political standing. She stood and began pacing behind her chair, a habit that made the Zephyrian security detail visibly nervous. Do you understand what that means, Ambassador? Your government told the galaxy that the Zephyrian collective was capable of and willing to commit complete genocide. They branded themselves as a species that would eliminate entire civilizations for political convenience. The implications were sinking in, and Velthara looked increasingly sick. The galaxy now sees you exactly as you presented yourselves, as genocidal expansionists who celebrate the extinction of other species. The Altarian Republic has already begun reviewing their defense treaties with you. The Centauri Federation is questioning whether a species that claims credit for genocide can be trusted with coalition membership. Kira sat back down, her expression hardening. Your government wanted to be seen as the civilization that eliminated the human threat. Congratulations. You've achieved exactly what you wanted. What does humanity want? Velthara asked desperately. Reparations? Territory? We can negotiate. Negotiate? Kira's laugh was cold. Ambassador, your government announced that humanity is extinct. Dead species don't negotiate. Extinct civilizations don't sign treaties. You can't make deals with ghosts. She activated another holographic display, this one showing human military deployments throughout the region. The scope of it made Velthara's eyes widen in horror. What you see here is not the deployment pattern of a species seeking negotiation, Kira explained. This is the deployment pattern of a species that no longer exists according to galactic law. Extinct civilizations aren't bound by treaties, diplomatic protocols, or rules of engagement. The display showed human ships positioned throughout Zephyrian space, moving with complete impunity through territories they technically had no legal right to enter, because legally they didn't exist to enter anywhere. You've created the perfect enemy, Kira continued. A military force with advanced technology, detailed intelligence on your operations, and absolutely no legal constraints on their actions. When humans were alive, we followed galactic law. We respected sovereignty, we honored treaties. Her smile was not pleasant. But you killed us, remember? You announced it to the galaxy. Dead species don't follow living species rules. Velthara was breathing heavily now, her blue skin mottled with stress patterns. What do you want us to do? We want you to experience the consequences of claiming to have committed genocide, Kira replied simply. Your government told the galaxy that you broke humanity completely, that you described our alleged suffering in detail for political entertainment. She stood again, moving to the viewing port to stare out at the nebula. We've decided to show you what that actually looks like. For the next 20 minutes, Kira outlined what human intelligence had designated Operation Retribution. It wasn't a traditional military campaign seeking territorial gain or resource control. It was something far more sophisticated and terrifying. Phase 1 involved demonstrating that humanity was still alive and capable of striking anywhere in Zephyrian space without warning. Your people now understand that their government lied about our extinction. Phase 2 involved systematic isolation of all Zephyrian facilities established since the Extinction broadcast. Every mining operation, colonial outpost, and military base built on the assumption that humans were dead has been cut off from communication with your government. Veltara's hands were shaking. You're talking about hundreds of facilities, thousands of civilians. Phase 3, Kira continued without acknowledging the interruption, involves economic warfare. Human ships are currently intercepting Zephyrian trade convoys throughout neutral space. Since we don't officially exist, these aren't acts of piracy under galactic law. They're natural phenomena. Ships and cargo simply disappear. The holographic display updated to show trade routes throughout the sector. Red markers indicated convoy routes that had been disrupted in the past week. There were dozens of them. Phase 4 will involve targeted strikes against Zephyrian military assets, not to capture territory or resources, but to demonstrate the cost of claiming credit for genocide. Your government wanted the galaxy to see them as a force capable of eliminating entire species. We're going to show everyone exactly how accurate that assessment was. You're talking about war, Velthara whispered. No, Kira corrected. War involves two living species in conflict. Your government announced that one of those species no longer exists. This is something else entirely." She returned to her seat and looked directly at the Zephyrian ambassador. "This is what happens when a supposedly extinct species decides to make their fiction into reality." Velthara was quiet for several long minutes, processing the scope of what she was hearing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "What would it take for this to stop?" "Stop? Ambassador, I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a negotiation where humanity makes demands and waits for compliance.
Their government announced that we were extinct.
We've decided to honor that announcement." She activated a final holographic display showing human military assets throughout the galaxy. The scope was staggering. Ships, bases, and installations that the Zephyrians had never suspected existed, all operating under the perfect cover of non-existence. Extinct species don't stop, Ambassador. They don't negotiate, they don't compromise, and they don't forgive. They simply exist as a constant reminder of what happens when someone claims credit for their destruction. The recording device on the table chimed softly, indicating that the conversation was being transmitted in real time to human command centers throughout the galaxy. Every word was being heard by the leadership of a species that had just learned their enemy was far more capable and far less forgiving than they had ever imagined. "Your government wanted to be known as the civilization that eliminated humanity," Kira said as she gathered her materials. "We're going to make sure that reputation is completely accurate." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Ambassador, you might want to advise your government to stop selling those fake human artifacts. The real ones are much more dangerous." As the door closed behind her, Velthara sat alone in the conference room, staring at the holographic displays showing the true scope of human military capability. For the first time, she understood the magnitude of what her government had done. They hadn't just lied about committing genocide. They had declared war on a species infinitely more capable than they had realized, and then given that species the perfect justification and legal cover to respond without constraint. The humans weren't seeking territory or resources. They weren't trying to establish dominance or expand their influence. They were doing something far more terrifying than that. They were keeping a promise. General Thomas Harrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Revenant, watching through the massive viewing screen as the Zephyrian home system came into view. Behind him, the largest human fleet ever assembled moved in perfect formation. 600 ships that, according to galactic records, didn't exist, crewed by over 200,000 personnel who were supposedly extinct. It had been 4 months since Operation Retribution began. 4 months of systematic strikes against Zephyrian assets throughout their territory. 4 months of economic warfare that had crippled their trade networks. 4 months of psychological warfare that had left the entire Zephyrian population living in fear of the impossible human survivors. "Sir," Captain Rodriguez reported from the communication station, "we're receiving standard system approach protocols from Zephyrian traffic control. They're treating us like we're actually here." Harrison smiled grimly. "Because we are here, Captain?" The question is whether they're finally ready to admit it. The tactical display showed the defensive arrangements around Zephyr Prime, the heavily industrialized homeworld of the collective. What it revealed made Harrison's expression darken considerably. The planet was surrounded by defensive platforms, missile arrays, and fleet formations that represented the most significant military buildup in Zephyrian history. "They've turned their entire home system into a fortress," observed Commander Singh from the tactical station. "Energy readings indicate full military alert status across all installations." "Of course they have," Harrison replied. "For months, their government has been claiming that attacks against their facilities were impossible because humans were extinct. Their own citizens have been demanding explanations for how dead humans could destroy their ships and capture their territory." He called up intelligence reports gathered by human operatives throughout Zephyrian space. The picture they painted was one of a civilization in crisis. Civil unrest on 12 worlds. Military leaders calling for the resignation of the Defense Council. Colonial governors refusing to deploy to territories that were supposedly secured by human extinction. Trade guilds demanding military escorts for convoys traveling through space that should be completely safe. Captain Rodriguez looked up from her station. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Zephyr Prime." "Grand Admiral Zethkri requests immediate communication with the fleet commander." "Put him through." The main screen shifted to show the interior of what was clearly a military command center. Grand Admiral Zethkri looked like he had aged decades in the past 4 months. His blue skin was pale and mottled with stress patterns, and his 6 eyes showed the exhaustion of a leader facing an impossible situation. General Harrison, Zethkri began, his voice carefully controlled, I am authorized by the Collective Defense Council to discuss terms for ending hostilities between our species. Harrison studied the Zephyrian admiral for several long moments before responding. Admiral, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. There are no hostilities between our species. The confusion on Zethkri's face was obvious. General, human forces have conducted systematic attacks throughout our territory for 4 months. Our trade networks have been disrupted, our colonies isolated, and our military installations destroyed. That's impossible, Harrison replied with false puzzlement. Humans are extinct. Your government announced it to the galaxy. We have the recording. He gestured, and the bridge's secondary screen began playing the original Zephyrian broadcast claiming credit for humanity's complete elimination. According to official galactic records, this conversation cannot be taking place, Harrison continued. Extinct species don't command fleets. Dead civilizations don't conduct military operations. Zethkri's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching desperation. General, we acknowledge that the extinction announcement was inaccurate. The Collective is prepared to issue public corrections and make appropriate reparations. Reparations? Harrison's voice took on a dangerous edge. Admiral, your government didn't just lie about our extinction. They described our alleged suffering in vivid detail. They told the galaxy how human children supposedly died crying for their parents. They claimed credit for reducing our civilization to begging for mercy that you denied. The tactical display updated to show the full scope of human military assets surrounding the Zephyrian system. Ships appeared on sensors that had been completely invisible moments before, revealing that the human fleet was nearly 3 times larger than initial scans had indicated. Your government also used that lie to justify the largest territorial expansion in Zephyrian history, Harrison continued. You've established colonies, mining operations, and military bases in 47 star systems based on the assumption that the previous claimants were dead. Tell me, Admiral, how do you make reparations to a species that doesn't exist? Before Zethkri could answer, another voice joined the conversation. The screen split to show a second Zephyrian, this one wearing the ceremonial robes of the collective civilian leadership. General Harrison, the newcomer said, I am Grand Counselor Veltar. The Collective is prepared to offer full territorial concessions in the disputed systems, plus significant economic compensation for any damages caused by our premature extinction announcement. Harrison's expression didn't change. Counselor, I appreciate the offer, but extinct species don't sign treaties. Dead civilizations don't accept territorial concessions. You can't negotiate with ghosts. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you want? Veltar asked desperately. We want, Harrison said slowly, for your extinction announcement to be completely accurate. The implications hit both Zephyrians simultaneously. Veltar's skin went pale, while Zethkri's hands began shaking. You're talking about actual genocide, the Admiral whispered. Your government claimed credit for genocide against humanity, Harrison replied. You announced it to the galaxy. You profited from it.
You celebrated it.
You used it to expand your territory and increase your political standing among species that saw us as a threat. He stood and moved to the viewing screen, looking down at the blue-green world below. The only inaccuracy in your announcement was the identity of the extinct species. Captain Rodriguez looked up from her communication station. Sir, we're receiving thousands of transmissions from the planet's surface. Civilian evacuation requests, diplomatic immunity claims, surrender offers for military installations. Panic, Harrison observed with satisfaction. They're finally experiencing what they claim to have inflicted on us. He activated the fleet communication channel, linking him to the commanders of 600 human warships surrounding Zephyr Prime. All units, this is Fleet Command. Begin Phase 5 of Operation Retribution. Target only military installations and government facilities. Civilian population centers are to remain untouched. The response was immediate and devastating. Human ships that had remained cloaked suddenly revealed themselves throughout the Zephyrian home system. Energy weapons designed for precise surgical strikes began targeting military satellites, defense platforms, and orbital installations. The Zephyrian defensive fleet attempted to respond, but found themselves facing an enemy that fought with perfect coordination and technology decades ahead of their own. Ships that should have been destroyed by defensive fire simply absorbed the damage and continued their attacks. Weapons that should have disabled human vessels seemed to have no effect at all. Our defensive grid is being systematically dismantled, Admiral Zethkri reported, his voice hollow. Estimated time to complete loss of orbital defenses, 37 minutes. Your technology, Veltar observed with growing horror. "It's far beyond anything we understood humans to possess." Harrison turned back to the communication screen. "Counselor, for 50 years your species and others have treated humanity as primitive newcomers who needed to be contained and controlled. You saw our rapid expansion and technological development as a threat to the established galactic order. The tactical display updated to show human technological capabilities that had been kept hidden for decades, cloaking systems that made ships completely invisible to all known sensors, defensive shields that could absorb direct hits from the most powerful weapons in Zephyrian arsenal, weapon systems that could target individual systems within enemy ships with surgical precision. What you never realized is that humans have been deliberately limiting our technological displays to avoid triggering a preemptive coalition against us. We've been pretending to be less advanced than we actually were to maintain peaceful coexistence." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "But extinct species don't need to worry about peaceful coexistence." The attack continued with mechanical precision. Every military installation in the Zephyrian home system was systematically disabled or destroyed. Orbital shipyards that had been building vessels for centuries were reduced to drifting debris. Communication satellites that linked the homeworld to the rest of the collective were eliminated. Within 2 hours, Zephyr Prime was completely isolated from the rest of their civilization. Admiral Zefkri's voice was barely a whisper. "Our entire defensive capability has been eliminated. The planet is defenseless." Harrison nodded and activated a recording device. What he said next would be transmitted to every human colony and shipped throughout the galaxy. "Citizens of Earth and all human colonies, this is General Harrison commanding the Retribution Fleet. 4 months ago, the Zephyrian Collective announced to the galaxy that they had successfully exterminated our species. They claimed credit for genocide and used that claim to expand into our territory." He paused, looking down at the helpless planet below. "Today, we have made their claim accurate. The Zephyrian Collective's military capacity has been eliminated. Their government facilities have been destroyed. Their ability to project power beyond their homeworld has been permanently removed." The recording continued for several more minutes, documenting the complete tactical victory over a species that had claimed credit for humanity's extinction. But when it ended, Harrison did something that surprised everyone listening. "Fleet command to all vessels. Begin humanitarian supply drops to civilian population centers. Medical supplies, food, and emergency shelter materials are to be delivered immediately." Captain Rodriguez stared at him in confusion. "Sir?" Harrison turned back to the communication channel where the Zephyrian leaders waited in terrified silence. "Admiral, Counselor, your military is gone. Your government is dismantled. Your ability to threaten any other species has been permanently removed. But unlike the genocide you claim to have committed against us, we're not going to let your people suffer." He gestured toward the planet below, where human ships were already beginning supply drops to population centers. "The difference between your species and mine, gentlemen, is that when humans have the power to commit actual genocide, we choose not to use it." The recording ended, leaving the two Zephyrian leaders staring at a screen that showed human ships delivering aid to the very population they could have destroyed. "Our government wanted to be known as the species that eliminated humanity," Harrison said quietly. "Instead, you'll be remembered as the species that learned the difference between claiming to commit genocide and having the power to actually do it." As the human fleet began establishing a permanent presence around Zephyr Prime, one fact became clear to observers throughout the galaxy. Humanity had just demonstrated the most devastating display of military superiority in galactic history, and then immediately used that same capability for humanitarian relief. It was a message that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. 1 year after the fall of Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Kira Nakamura stood before the Galactic Coalition Assembly for the first time since humanity's supposed extinction. The great amphitheater buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of species took their seats. Many of them had celebrated humanity's alleged demise 18 months earlier. Today they would learn the true cost of that celebration. The human delegation took their seats in what had once been empty chairs reserved for extinct species. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. "Distinguished representatives," Chairman Voltar of the Altarian Republic began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "we are here to address the unprecedented situation regarding the Zephyrian Collective's false extinction announcement and the subsequent human response." Behind him, massive holographic displays showed the current state of former Zephyrian space. What they revealed sent murmurs of shock rippling through the assembly. Where once there had been a sprawling interstellar empire spanning 63 star systems, now there was a collection of isolated worlds under human administrative control. The Zephyrian military had been completely dismantled. Their government had been dissolved. Their ability to project power beyond their homeworld had been permanently removed. But most shocking of all, not a single Zephyrian civilian had been harmed during the entire operation. Ambassador Nakamura, Chairman Volter continued, the Coalition requests a formal explanation for humanity's actions following the false extinction announcement. Kira rose from her seat and moved to the central speaking platform. Around her, hundreds of alien representatives watched with mixtures of fear, fascination, and respect. The species that many of them had seen as primitive newcomers had just achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, the complete subjugation of a major civilization without civilian casualties. Chairman Voltar, distinguished representatives, Kira began, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater, humanity appreciates this opportunity to address the concerns of the galactic community. She activated her holographic display showing the original Zephyrian broadcast that had started everything. 18 months ago, the Zephyrian Collective announced to this assembly and to the galaxy that they had successfully exterminated the human species. They described our alleged suffering in vivid detail. They claimed credit for genocide and used that claim to justify territorial expansion and increase their political standing. The recording played again, filling the chamber with the Zephyrian speaker's proud description of humanity's supposed destruction. What the Zephyrians failed to consider, Kira continued as the recording ended, was how an actually living species might respond to having genocide falsely attributed to their extinct enemies. She gestured, and the display shifted to show intelligence reports gathered during the months following the broadcast. Within days of this announcement, Zephyrian military and civilian assets began expanding into space they claimed had been liberated by human extinction. Trading guilds began selling supposed human artifacts to collectors throughout the galaxy. Government officials used our alleged destruction as proof of Zephyrian military superiority. The evidence was damning. Purchase orders for fake human memorabilia. Military deployment orders referencing eliminated human threat. Diplomatic communications discussing the political advantages of being seen as the species that had solved the human problem. They didn't just lie about committing genocide, Kira said, her voice hardening. They built an entire political and economic strategy around that lie. Representative Thekmore of the Centauri Federation spoke up. Ambassador, while the Zephyrian deception was clearly unethical, the human response seems disproportionate. You've essentially conquered an entire civilization. Have we? Kira asked, tilting her head with apparent curiosity. Representative Thekmore, could you clarify what you mean by conquered? She activated a new display showing the current administration of former Zephyrian territory. Former Zephyrian colonies are now administered by joint human local governments elected by the populations of those worlds. Zephyrian civilians have full rights and representation in those governments. Trade networks have been re-established under human protection, resulting in economic growth across the region. The data was irrefutable. Every world that had been under Zephyrian control was now more prosperous, more secure, and more democratic than it had been under the Collective. Furthermore, Kira continued, Zephyrian cultural sites, historical records, and educational institutions have not only been preserved but expanded under human administration. We've established 3 new universities on Zephyr Prime alone. Representative Sekval of the Andromedan Union raised a tentacle. Ambassador, you're describing benevolent occupation, but the fact remains that you've eliminated Zephyrian sovereignty through military force. Did we? Kira asked again. Representative Sekval, I'd like to direct your attention to Galactic Law Statute 247, subsection 15. The relevant legal text appeared on the chamber's displays, and a collective intake of breath could be heard throughout the amphitheater. Any species that publicly claims credit for the genocide of another species forfeits all legal protections under galactic law until such time as the allegedly extinct species confirms their continued existence and formally pardons the false claim. By claiming credit for human extinction, the Zephyrians had legally classified themselves as genocidal conquerors. Under galactic law, they had forfeited all rights to sovereignty, territorial integrity, or diplomatic protection. The Zephyrian Collective legally ceased to exist the moment they claimed credit for our genocide, Kira explained. Everything that happened afterward was simply humanity exercising our legal right to respond to a species that had publicly declared themselves our exterminators. Chairman Voltar looked shaken. Ambassador, are you saying that everything humanity did was technically legal? Everything humanity did was explicitly authorized by galactic law, Kira confirmed. The Zephyrians didn't just lie about committing genocide. They legally classified themselves as a genocidal civilization and forfeited all protections accordingly. She paused, letting the full impact sink in. The question before this assembly isn't whether humanity acted legally. We did. The question is what message this sends to other species who might consider similar deceptions. Representative Velkara of the Tau Ceti Confederation spoke up nervously. What message do you believe it sends? Kira smiled, and it was not entirely pleasant. That claiming credit for genocide against humanity is remarkably poor decision-making. The chamber fell silent as the representatives processed what they'd learned. The species many of them had seen as a threat to galactic stability had just demonstrated the most sophisticated display of military, legal, and diplomatic strategy in Coalition history. There is one additional matter, Kira continued, activating a final holographic display. During our investigation of Zephyrian government records, we discovered something troubling. The display showed intercepted communications between various Coalition species discussing the human problem and the need for decisive action to contain human expansion. Multiple Coalition members were aware of the Zephyrian plan to announce our extinction. Several species provided political support for the deception. A few even offered to assist with actual military action if the lie was discovered. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Species that supported the false extinction announcement include the Rigel Commerce Guild, the Vegan Colonial Authority, and the Betelgeuse Defense Pact. We have complete records of their communications with Zephyrian leadership. Panicked murmurs began spreading through the sections representing those species. However, Kira continued, raising her voice to restore order, humanity recognizes that these species were responding to what they perceived as a legitimate announcement from an ally. We hold them less responsible than the Zephyrians who initiated the deception. The relief in those sections was palpable. Nevertheless, her voice hardened again, any future attempts to declare humanity extinct, eliminate human colonies, or interfere with human expansion will be met with the same response the Zephyrians received. She gestured toward the displays showing the former Zephyrian Empire. The collective wanted to be known as the species that eliminated the human threat. We ensured that their reputation was completely accurate. Chairman Voltar cleared his throat nervously. Ambassador, what are humanity's intentions going forward? Will you be seeking additional territorial expansion or reparations from species that supported the deception? Kira considered the question for several moments before answering. Chairman, humanity has never sought galactic dominance or territorial expansion for its own sake. What we've always wanted is simple, the right to exist and grow without other species plotting our extinction. She looked around the amphitheater, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of species. For 50 years we've followed galactic law, respected sovereignty, and tried to be good galactic citizens despite facing prejudice and hostility from civilizations that saw our rapid development as a threat. We limited our technological displays to avoid triggering preemptive action against us. We accepted restrictions on our expansion that were never applied to other species. Her expression grew serious. The Zephyrian incident taught us that playing by rules that others don't follow is a losing strategy. It also taught us that other species respected the idea of our extinction more than they ever respected our existence. The silence in the chamber was deafening. So going forward, humanity will operate under new principles. We will continue to follow galactic law, but we will no longer accept restrictions that aren't applied equally to all species. We will continue to respect sovereignty, but we will not tolerate threats to our existence, and we will never again pretend to be less capable than we actually are. She smiled again, and this time it was genuinely pleasant. The galaxy has seen what happens when someone claims credit for humanity's extinction. We trust that lesson will prove educational for everyone involved. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, the conversations that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. The species that many had seen as newcomers requiring containment had just demonstrated that they were the most advanced, most capable, and most dangerous civilization in the galaxy. More importantly, they had shown that when they possessed the power to commit actual genocide, they chose instead to use it for reconstruction and humanitarian aid. The Zephyrian Collective had wanted to be remembered as the species that eliminated humanity. Instead, they became the species that taught the galaxy never to lie about fighting a war they weren't prepared to actually win. And in the end, perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of all, that claiming credit for victory over humanity was the fastest way to discover what actual defeat looked like. The age of human containment was over. The age of human expansion had begun. And this time no one would make the mistake of thinking they could stop it by simply pretending it wasn't happening.